The Gorlon Encounter, by Stephen Lake. The Gorlon were a violent and petulant race. Every species, every empire, and every enemy they had ever encountered throughout their many centuries of galactic conquest had been completely and totally exterminated, leaving behind nothing but ashes and destruction in their wake. No one had ever, in all of known history, stopped their invincible and mighty power. That is, until they met us. Who are we, you might ask? We are the Federation, a loose-knit group of sentient species whose primary goal is peace, safety and unity across the entire known galaxy. This peace we enjoy was achieved through superior strength of arms when needed, and expert diplomacy when not. The Gorlon, on the other hand, only knew war, and were not interested in any way in having peace. For them it was either total victory, or death. However, this was not an issue for us because, when it came to dealing with enemies similar to the Gorlon, we had more than sufficient experience. So, just as it was in the many eons leading up to our first meeting with them, we would come away from this fight smelling like a bundle of Arcturian sif flowers. And how was that possible? It was because of the Federation's incredible strength. But why was the Federation so powerful? It wasn't just because of the many dark and difficult wars it had been forced to fight over the many centuries of its existence. No, the Federation had become as powerful and durable as it was because of the Tyrrhenians, a race of humanoids who'd not only pioneered and founded it, but also all of its predecessors, including the Tyrrhenian Alliance, the Galactic Confederacy, and the Alliance of Sentient Worlds. It was through each of these former, failed alliances, that the Tyrrhenians had learned many useful and valuable lessons that they would then use to turn the Federation into a grand and glorious republic that was both kind and caring, as well as powerful and indomitable, both of which were sorely needed in an otherwise violent, dark and cold universe. And it was the Federation's powerful and indomitable fleet that the Gorlon ran headlong into when they first entered Federation space. It would also be the last galactic alliance that the Gorlon would ever face, as they would not survive their fateful and foolhardy encounter with us. How do I know this? I was there. I saw it all. Who am I, you might ask? I'm Commander Tog, First Officer of the Federation Battle Cruiser Sheg, a Tarlinian by birth, and a soldier of great pride. However, back then, during the war, I was merely an ensign assigned to the Federation destroyer Amorga as her chief navigation officer. During that war, our ship's one and only encounter with the Gorlon occurred during our assignment to protect KB-21JM9, a Type G binary star system located in the Kivios sector. And, while the system itself was not colonized, as were so many others in that region, it was still highly valuable to the Federation, as it was rich in many resources that we desperately needed, not only for the defense of our alliance, but also for the daily needs of everyone who was under our protective umbrella. On this particular day we were stationed alone in that system, and tasked with the duty of watching over the mining colonies that were located on the surface of KB-21JM9A, the single and only planet in that system. And there were over 9,000 lives on that planet that depended on us for their protection, a fact that we did not take lightly. Our captain, Commander Darsagi, a Vestronian by birth, had received word several days earlier that Gorlon were lurking in our sector, seeking for any opportunity they could find to achieve either a magnificent victory, or merely a victim that they could easily defeat. This is because the Gorlon were becoming desperate, as they were losing their war against us, and handily at that. Needless to say, on that fateful day, when we fortuitously met them in battle in the KB-21JM9 star system, luck would, once again, prove to be anything but favorable to them. Even so, the battle we fought against them that day would not be an easy one, as we were only a single, tiny ship pitted against 5 massive Gorlon battleships. Needless to say, the odds were stacked firmly against us. Why do I say this? Well, it's because the ship I was on, the Amorga, was a Taos-class light destroyer. As far as shields, armor and survivability were concerned, she was nothing to write home about. If anything, our severe lack of adequate defenses was somewhat embarrassing. However, what she lacked in defenses, she more than made up for in firepower. This is because her 22, Class 6, triple-barrel heavy main turrets could deliver a crushing and devastating blow to whoever was unfortunate enough to be on the wrong end of them, no matter their size. But that overwhelming firepower also came with several key disadvantages. The first was that she could shoot further than she could see. Some might not think of that as a disadvantage. But when you consider that you first need to see your target in order to properly hit it, and that the Gorlon sensors could see further than ours, it meant that, in order to hit our target, we would need to get dangerously close to our enemy to engage them. As such, all the Gorlon needed to do to win a fight was merely stay just beyond our sensor range where they would be able to easily pick us apart without us being able to defend ourselves in any way. The second issue was our previously mentioned shields and armor. To gain the additional firepower that we had been forced to give up some of our armor and shield protection. But such things were not uncommon for a ship our size and type. That's because you either had great offense, or you had great defense. You almost never had both. That's mostly because our ship's small space frame simply didn't allow for a primary reactor big enough to provide both of those at the same time. This put us at a severe disadvantage against nearly every Gorlon ship out there. However, despite our weaknesses, we had something that the Gorlon didn't. Whereas their battle doctrine focused on them smashing their way through whatever enemy they encountered at all costs, we instead focused on strategy and tactics. A battle ethos that the Gorlon had apparently never encountered before. Or, if they had, they'd been so overwhelmingly powerful compared to their former adversaries that understanding and countering such things had been entirely unnecessary. How that could be possible, I don't know, as one would suspect that at least a few of the races they'd met in the past would have displayed enough battle prowess and strategy that it would have forced the Gorlon to adapt in order to survive. But that was evidently never the case, as history seems to indicate. That then, in turn, played greatly to the Federation's advantage. And it was on that fateful day, when we met this small Gorlon fleet in battle, that things began no differently than on any other. It all started around 23:04 hours, in the 6th watch, when our long-range sensors detected a small group of approaching warp signatures. Gorlon signatures, to be precise. And the only reason we saw them coming, given how short-sighted we were, was because of the numerous remote sensor probes that our captain had wisely deployed all across the system. These allowed us to see all that was happening in the area without our needing to risk ourselves, or our safety, to do so. The best part of this too was that they were too small, and too passive, for the Gorlon to detect, meaning that they would have no idea who was watching them, or even how. A few minutes after detecting the approaching warp signatures, a small Gorlon fleet dropped out of FTL about 180,000 kilometers in front of us. At this range they were well beyond our maximum sensor range, and we theirs. But, thanks to our network of remote sensor probes, we could easily see them with absolute crystal clarity, and that was more than enough for us. Stepping onto the bridge just shortly after the Night Watch commander had sounded red alert, our captain took command and quickly began to take in the entire battlefield in great detail. Knowing well before this that we could potentially be jumped at any moment by a Gorlon surprise attack, our captain, Commander Darsagi, had wisely parked our ship behind a very large and sensor-disruptive asteroid. To add extra benefit to its surprising ability to cloak our presence, he had also ordered us to full stealth and silent running. If the Gorlon wanted to launch a surprise attack on us, Darsagi was going to make that effort as difficult as possible. It was soon discovered that we would be facing off against 4 Gorlon NAK-class heavy destroyers, and 1 Sipik-class heavy battle cruiser. And, while those ships were not invincible, given our powerful main guns, we would still have our work cut out for us. To our credit, though, Commander Darsagi was a seasoned veteran of many similar engagements with the Gorlon, and knew each ship's weakness, and how to turn each of those to his advantage. For this we were grateful. The battle then began shortly after this, and simply enough at that, with the Gorlon cautiously scanning the area for Federation ships, as they did not know exactly how well defended the area was, or how many vessels might be nearby. This then led them to be cautious and thoughtful of every move they made because, after nearly 2 years of suffering one disastrous encounter after another with the Federation, their species' once unshakable belief in their ability to always emerge victorious from any battle had been severely curtailed. As Darsagi studied the battlefield before him, our tactical officers soon determined that the Gorlon fleet was comfortably within the maximum effective range of our main cannons. It would still be a tricky battle to fight at such long distance, what with the Gorlon ships standing off at nearly 80% of our cannons' maximum reach. But it would still leave our shots with more than enough power to do sufficient damage to the enemy destroyers if correctly targeted. Perhaps not as much as if they were much closer. But, if we wanted to survive this fight, we had to take our victories wherever we could get them. Realizing that the Gorlon were merely there looking for a fight, and not actually interested in our mining colonies, Commander Darsagi decided to engage them to determine if they were willing to stay and fight, or would instead flee the area. The latter was not typical for the Gorlon under normal circumstances. However, as I stated before, events of late, as well as numerous crushing defeats, had done much to take their boundless, foolish courage, and throw a cold bucket of water on it. As the element of surprise was currently in our favor, our commander ordered us to break cover and fire a single, 3-turret volley at one of the screening destroyers. As fate would have it, this worked far better than we could have ever hoped for. As we are a starship, and not an ocean-going naval vessel, we have the advantage of not having a large conning tower atop our ship that would give away our position should we reveal ourselves. This allowed our ship the ability to peak just above the top of the asteroid, and expose only our upper main batteries to the enemy fleet without dangerously exposing the rest of the ship to either detection, or enemy return fire. As soon as our upper turrets peeked into view, we opened up with just our 3 forward, topside turrets, leaving the rear 2 still fully charged in case of a surprise attack, just on the off chance that we didn't spot someone else from the Gorlon fleet lurking nearby. It's always better to be safe than sorry in any kind of battle like this. To our complete joy, and with ample degrees of surprise and relief, the 3 volleys we'd fired, 9 shots in total, traversed the distance between our 2 ships in a matter of seconds, and impacted the Gorlon heavy destroyer closest to us right in its primary engineering section, completely knocking it out. And, while the shot hadn't destroyed the ship as we would have liked, her armor being too formidable for us to penetrate in a single volley at such long range, we were still able to expertly place the 9 shots dead square in the center of the ship's weakest point, which disabled her main power in the process. This only worked because, for some still unknown reason, the Gorlon had come to the completely insane conclusion that it was a good idea to put sensitive power distribution and generation equipment near the outer hull of their ships, rather than deep within it where it would be best protected. The Federation, or really the Tyrrhenian Alliance, our forerunner, on the other hand, had learned that lesson early on, and had immediately taken steps to ensure that such weaknesses would never, ever again grace any battleship ever built by either them, or any of their allies, from that day forward. The Gorlon, however, obviously never learned that lesson, and today we would use that failure as a stepping stone towards victory. Anyhow, as I was saying, our cannon fire had accurately hit the Gorlon destroyer in her weakest point and disabled it. That's not bad given that we were shooting at a moving target using nothing more than remote sensor probes to triangulate its position. Even better yet, our surprise attack had caught the Gorlon with their shields down. Why they would come into one of our systems with those down, I have no idea. Either way, we were glad they had. Unfortunately, the rest of the battle would now play out without that advantage being available to us as the other Gorlon ships immediately raised shields, being uncertain of who they were fighting, or even where they were. Fearing the worst, the Gorlon admiral, who was in command of their sole battle cruiser, sent his 3 remaining destroyers in our direction, hoping to locate and destroy us before we could destroy them. A ballsy move for certain, given what had just happened to one of their destroyers, but a necessary one as well. After receiving their orders, the 3 Gorlon heavy destroyers jammed their respective throttles to the firewall, and came in our direction with incredible speed. To his credit, our commander, who we surmise was born with a pair of 6-pound cast iron testicles, neither flinched, nor panicked at this. Instead, he merely drew his ship back down again, behind the protection and concealment of the asteroid, and waited. At first we weren't certain why he'd done this instead of maneuvering out of the area, as that's typically what you'd do in a situation like this in order to avoid being easily located and killed. I mean, after all, the only thing the Gorlon needed to do to locate us was to merely follow our weapon's fire back to its source. That's why any normal commander, who was in his right mind, would have fled the area as fast as possible. Apparently the Gorlon thought the same thing as well, and had acted accordingly. Thus our commander's decision to stay put wasn't actually a bad decision after all. As we stood quietly and watched, the Gorlon heavy destroyers closed on the asteroid field at full throttle, until they came within 68,000 kilometers, directly to our 4, at which point they opened fire with devastating force, hoping to flush us out in the process. But, unbeknownst to the Gorlon, we weren't actually where they had anticipated. And, after the mess they made of that area, we were very grateful that we weren't. Eventually the Gorlon destroyers came to a full stop as their guns fell silent. Clearly they were very confused about why they'd failed to find us. Seeing the opening that this created, Darsagi ordered our ship to rise up again. This time he put us at an angle where we could bring not just the entirety of our upper turrets to bear on the enemy, but also 3 of our port side ones as well. Moments later we opened fire, hitting one of the destroyers in her weakest point, just as we'd done to the other. Unfortunately, with her shields up, it did little more than ring their bell, as one would say. This caused the Gorlon to go into complete and absolute panic mode. At first they fired wildly in every direction, trying their best to locate us, to no avail. After nearly a minute the Gorlon guns fell silent again. Everyone on the bridge chuckled quietly at this. However, that laughter was soon quenched as the Gorlon ships all turned and began heading our way. Apparently, some clear-thinking tactical officer had roughly determined where we had fired from, and notified the other ships of this. Their captains then ordered their crews to change course and head in our general direction. But not all of those 3 Gorlon destroyers would continue the fight. This is because one of the ships, the one we had hit just moments earlier, suffered a catastrophic overload in their power distribution network as soon as they went to full power. This, in turn, knocked out one of their engines, which created a dangerous yaw that forced them to shut down their other engines until they could complete repairs. Now there was only 2 of them left to deal with. Despite this, having even just one of them still able to fight was too many. Remember, it wasn't our offensive capabilities that were our weakness. It was our limited defenses that put us in such great peril. We then stood quietly on the bridge and watched anxiously as the 2 remaining Gorlon heavy destroyers came past us at full sublight, firing randomly into the asteroid field as they did in hopes of flushing us out or, even better yet, hitting us. As this unfolded, fear gripped every one of us on the bridge like a frigid, Arctic cold snap, freezing us solid where we stood. If even one of those shots hit us, it could severely damage our ship, or even possibly destroy us. Only our commander remained stalwart and unmovable during this time, despite the danger that was lurking just off our port bow, as our ship was now well within the Gorlon's sensor detection range. Or, at least, we would have been were it not for our powerful stealth systems, and the sensor-scattering wonders of the asteroid we were hiding behind. Because of this, the Gorlon would have needed to get within less than 10,000 kilometers of us before we would have begun having any real need of worry. The 2 Gorlon destroyers soon raced past us, their guns continuing to fire wildly into the asteroid field around us in a vain effort to flush us out. Eventually they again stopped, about 130,000 kilometers to our aft, and then turned broadside to us. We were all shocked at this. You couldn't have asked for a better angle to hit them at if you'd tried. Seeing this, Darsagi ordered us to move into position and open fire. Our volley, as before, found its mark, but did not kill its target. Seeing its companion taking fire, the 2nd Gorlon destroyer immediately pulled hard to port and came straight at us. The first destroyer, the one we'd just hit, wisely chose instead to stay put, not wanting to suffer an identical fate as what had befallen its other companion after a similar injury. It was now just us, and the one remaining operational enemy destroyer. The cruiser, who had been receiving updates on the battle this whole time, had wisely chosen to stay back and let its screening force do the heavy lifting. However, that fortitude of conviction was quickly wearing thin as they helplessly watched their screening destroyers systematically knocked out, one by one, without achieving even a single hit on their still unknown, invisible, and elusive enemy. But, so long as the cruiser remained where it was, we still had a chance. It was if and when she eventually entered the fight that we might be forced to flee. As the cruiser continued to remain where it was, we silently watched as the last operational Gorlon destroyer closed rapidly on us, guns blazing, its shots, once again peppering the asteroid field around us. However, despite this, in her wild and foolish attempt to flush us out, all of her shots flew wide of us, leaving us still safe in the place where we were hiding. But that did nothing to calm our fear, as the constant barrage of fire, being cast in our general direction, was beginning to drive us to a point of near total panic. The only thing holding us together at this point was our commander's unwavering fearlessness. In the midst of this, he sat quietly in his command chair and watched through narrow, slotted eyes as the Gorlon destroyer approached us, patiently counting down the moments before we would be forced out of hiding, and possibly into the jaws of death. However, to everyone's surprise, just as the enemy destroyer closed to within 30,000 kilometers of us, her commander did something that we could only describe as the most foolhardy thing possible. He turned hard to port, steering away from us as he did, and quickly put a respectable distance between himself and the asteroid field. Clearly this had been a game of galactic chicken, and the Gorlon had been the first ones to blink. Seeing this, Darsagi ordered us to rise above the asteroid we were hiding behind and fire all 5 upper turrets into the Gorlon destroyer. Just like with the other ships, every one of our shots hit her weak spot with devastating force. However, unlike before, that had not been enough to knock her out, and the Gorlon destroyer was immediately able to return fire. But, to our great relief, in their shocked and frenzied impatience, they'd fired high and wide of us, missing our ship and our protective asteroid completely. Rolling the ship to starboard to expose our port side turrets, as our topside turrets were still in the process of recharging, we aimed at the Gorlon destroyer and fired. This again did not knock her out. So we rolled further to expose our belly turrets, which finally did the job. The Gorlon destroyer was now no longer able to fight. Even so, we did not break cover, despite the battle having finally turned in our favor. This is because, even though we'd successfully disabled the 4 Gorlon heavy destroyers, we had their single remaining battle cruiser to deal with, and she was still fresh, undamaged, and fully capable of exterminating us if she wished. She also dwarfed her heavy destroyer escorts in firepower and size by a factor of 3 to 1. So, until we dealt with her, this battle was far from over. But, with her screening ships now out of action, that would be considerably easier. Wanting to remain invisible and mysterious to the Gorlon, while cautiously engaging the cruiser, we slipped out of our hiding place, and took the long way around to reach her, flying just beyond their sensor range as we did. We chose to do this in order to ensure that, no matter what happened, they would not see us, and thus would still not know who, or what they were up against. We soon closed to within 160,000 kilometers of the cruiser and opened fire with our upper, port side and belly turrets all at the same time. 15 turrets, 45 rounds total, erupted from our ship and quickly crossed the distance to the enemy cruiser. As we expected, her shields were too powerful for our cannons, and easily brushed aside our volley. However, the cruiser didn't come away unscathed. As our sensor probes could see, our volley, while not damaging, had successfully rippled her shields. This was a good sign as it indicated that she would indeed be vulnerable to our cannons, even if we had to beat on her for a while in order to break through them. It was at this moment that our commander ordered us to turn hard to starboard, and immediately go to full sublight as the Gorlon cruiser returned fire. Given what the enemy destroyers had reported back to the cruiser about their battle with us, Darsagi knew that the Gorlon would correctly assume that he would stick to his prior tactic of remaining put, instead of maneuvering, and thus they had poured all of their firepower into our now former position. However, to their dismay, this had not worked as our commander had wisely anticipated such a move, and thus had ordered us to maneuver as soon as we fired. This is why we loved our commander so much. No matter how difficult the battle, he was always one step ahead of the enemy at all times, which is literally the only thing that was keeping us alive during this fight. However, simply evading their return fire would not be enough. The enemy had to believe that we were dead, or else we might become dead for real if we weren't careful. Therefore, needing to trick the enemy into thinking that they'd succeeded in their effort to destroy us, he ordered us to launch a volley of torpedoes aft, which detonated as soon as the enemy cannon shots reached our now prior location. The explosion, of which barely registered on their sensors, gave the Gorlon a false sense of security in thinking that we had successfully been destroyed. It was our next volley, however, that quickly put that idea to rest. Hurriedly recovering from this, the Gorlon immediately returned fire on the location where our latest shots had come from, and were soon greeted by yet another explosion, just like before. But this did little to calm them, or dispel their fears. If anything, this was creating a growing panic in them as, best we could tell, they now firmly believed that they were actually facing a much larger, and more powerful force than they'd first thought. But, being stubborn like the Gorlon were, they chose instead to continue engaging our mysterious fleet, rather than wisely tucking tail and fleeing the area to fight again another day, even if that meant abandoning their 4 wounded heavy destroyers to almost certain destruction. After all, in the Gorlon mind, those could always be replaced. So their loss would only result in a minor setback for them, and not a total defeat. Despite this, the Gorlon committed themselves to winning this battle, no matter what, even if it killed them. The Gorlon cruisers soon accelerated to full sublight and began to maneuver towards us in a vain hope of locating and engaging us at point-blank range. But, to our great relief, their new course would only bring them to within 90,000 kilometers of us. This meant that, while we were still well within the maximum range of the Gorlon sensors, our ship's stealth and silent running capabilities would continue to make us completely invisible to them so long as we stayed at least 30,000 kilometers away, of which we most certainly would. Even so, not wanting to accidentally give away our position due to the ion trail that our engines were creating, our commander ordered us to cut all power. Not go to full stop. Just cut power. Since we were already in motion at the time, this would allow us to drift silently forward on our original course, while continuing to remain invisible to the Gorlon sensors. Or, at least we hoped that would be the case. To our welcome surprise, it worked. As the Gorlon cruiser began to pass by us, we aimed our cannons, both top, port and keel at her, and opened fire. As expected, however, our attack did little more than ripple her shields, just as before. Even so, the clearly obvious trail of plasma leaking out of her starboard side aft hull told us that we had somehow miraculously made her bleed. This was a good sign that our efforts to take her down were working. Who would have thought that our plucky little, overgunned, lightly armored destroyer could wound a massive, Gorlon heavy cruiser in the way we had? Interestingly enough, the Gorlon did not return fire this time. I think they were wanting to see if they could locate us by detecting our ion trail, just as our captain had predicted they might do, since cannon fire does such a wonderful job of blinding sensors and obscuring hard-to-detect energy emissions such as that. Realizing this, our captain wisely kept our engines cold until we were well outside Gorlon sensor and weapons range. He then brought us hard about, into full FTL for just a brief second before dropping us back to sublight. The incredible momentum this created allowed us to quickly catch up to the Gorlon cruiser a few minutes later, and entirely undetected. We then fired one final volley into her previously damaged weak point, causing her shields to collapse, as well as her power generation systems, which knocked out her ability to fight. We then, over the next few minutes, fired several more full power volleys into her side until she was completely dead in the water. After this we put 2 volleys into her reactor, which resulted in a core breach that completely destroyed the ship in a brilliant antimatter explosion. From here it was just a matter of going around and cleaning up all of the other Gorlon ships that we had previously wounded, which we did with great ease. Satisfied with our work, Commander Darsagi then ordered us back to the asteroid field to once again hide in the same way, in the same place as we had before, leaving behind the shattered, destroyed, and scattered remains of the Gorlon fleet as a warning to anyone else from their race who might wander into our system. And that, my friend, is how one plucky little Federation light destroyer successfully defended the KB-21 JM-9 system from a Gorlon battle fleet, and gave our petulant, bothersome enemy something to think about as their war against us, a war they would ultimately lose, continued on. And that war did not do so because we wished it to. It only did so because the Gorlon foolishly chose to keep fighting until every last one of their ships was completely destroyed. So, in the end, it was the Gorlon who wiped themselves out due to their own stupidity. The Federation merely helped them in that effort. And, to be completely frank, I'm happy we did. The end.